Nowadays, a lot of you may compose directly into a DAW like Logic or Pro Tools or something similar, playing the MIDI instruments on a keyboard. Most of these programs have the ability to convert the played-in MIDI to notation, in case you ever have to give it to an actual person to play. Watch out! So, here's some cautionary words on that. And very cool, you got an opportunity to work with live musicians. Very, very cool. Maybe a string quartet or your buddy who plays the saxophone or the trumpet. And if you've written your part in Logic, if you've written the sheet music in Logic or some equivalent, it'll probably look like shit if you don't edit it properly. So one very important point, professional musicians who read and write music, read music, and might play for you, especially the ones you might pay freedom dollars to, all hate wasted time. All of them. They're not as invested in your music as you are. It's just not that important to them. This is your baby, whatever. Not for them, though. They come, they want to do a good job. You know, they've studied on their instrument for years, probably. That being said, they're probably very happy to play for you, and they'll appreciate having good sheet music. I can't give a lesson here in how to read music, or write music for that matter, but I can say that it will pay dividends if you can read music. You won't be less cool. You'll still get pussy. I promise. You'll be cooler, actually, because you'll be the rock guy or the EDM guy or whatever who knows how to read music. And that's something that will, unfortunately, nowadays set you apart. And you'll get respect from your players, which is always a good thing. I won't go into writing for specific instruments. That's way too complex and will hopefully be covered elsewhere. But when in doubt, talk to your musicians. If you got questions while you're writing a bassoon part, talk to the bassoon player. He or she will be more than happy to talk about their instrument, and preferably do this before they get a crappy part in front of them. One point about reading orchestration books, you might be tempted to think of this as a quick solution. It'll probably be a waste of time if you're not planning on making a career out of working with live musicians. These books are big and, chock full of shit you might not need. The learning curve is just too steep. Another point is that most orchestration books are either way too in-depth or they contain volumes of arcane information. Some of these books are super old and a lot of points just don't apply anymore. Don't bother, I'd say. You'd have much more success Googling the words violin part if you're writing for a violin and figuring out what makes your part not look like that part. Yeah. I can't stress that last point enough. There's no lack of sheet music to be found on the internet, preferably from a known composer instead of some shitty, sheet music for all website or something that's trying to sell you some Billy Joel transcription. So, in short, look up something for your instrumentation. If you don't know what certain things or symbols mean, figure that out, like a fermata or something, and decipher what makes your part not look like this part. It's an easy enough fix, and if you can even get like 70% of the way there, your players will respect you more. I promise. All right. Some things that all DAWs, DAWs, are pretty bad at when it comes to translating MIDI to notation. Number one, dynamics. There's usually none, because your samples respond to some 0 to 127 scale, and notation of those dynamics just generally isn't considered. Learn what the dynamic markings are, piano, mezzo piano, and so forth. There's only a few, and use them. Drop in number deuce. Measure numbers. I understand having every measure be displayed and having every measure number be displayed is important. When you're diving into the MIDI data and trying to edit it. It baffles me that these programs don't think about what the players see, especially considering it's a notation function. Fine. There's no need to have every measure labeled. It happens, measure number label. It happens in some kind of, some arcane literature, especially Broadway stuff. But most of the time it looks amateurish. Put measure numbers above and to the left of the clef on each system. That's all you need. Number 3, multi-measure rests. I've seen this on more sessions, more times than I can count. If a player has 20 bars of rest, and you're not using any double bar lines, put 20 measure, multi-measure rest. Most of the time, the Logic or whatever will make it look like this. Unacceptable. First of all, it looks like shit. Secondly, it's wasting paper, and this may affect page turning, which you will in turn hear in all the microphones. Thirdly, it might lead to a counting error, and the player, might doubt himself. Maybe there's not a conductor to give a cue or something. Player comes in after 19 bars instead of 20. Use multi-measure rest. Number 3.5, because I recorded this out of order. It's something else I've seen more times than I can count, and may actually be the most important point here, or the thing that happens the most often. Rhythmic notation. It is so fucking horrible most of the time. The MIDI will generally reflect whatever you've played it, however you've played it. So if you've used a sustain pedal to make a violin note longer, because you're playing a string patch, it will reflect what you played most of the time, not the actual length of the note. In the piano part here, you can see that it was perhaps recorded, these arpeggios were recorded with a sustain pedal, but you only held the keys down for that long. That's what I mean. In addition, cutoffs are generally crappy as well. It happens very often that there'll be a 30-second note rest at the end of the bar when what you mean for it to do is play the entire length of the bar, because you had to shift to the next chord. So your fingers didn't play the duration of the note, the actual duration of the note, and that'll be reflected in the music because you were playing it on a keyboard. Clean all of this up. Number 4, playable voicings. This is usually a problem with a piano or keyboard staff because you entered the piano music on one MIDI staff, you recorded it, you played it in, and it all comes together on one translated staff when you go to the staff view or whatever it's called. Just watch out for this kind of thing. No. Number 5, articulations. If you're using any kind of modern samples, they'll probably have a multitude of articulations possible, like violin staccato or violin legato or something like that. They need to be translated to the sheet music, and if you ever played quarter notes at a slow tempo with a staccato patch, it'll just reflect quarter notes, which in actual sheet music should all get a dot, a staccato dot. Maybe it's a super slow tempo, in which case you might notate it like this. Number 6, phrase markings. Phrase markings, I should say. The concept of phrasing, especially for strings, where phrase markings actually mean bow markings, bowings, is painfully complex and not something even my colleagues all have a grip on. That being said, do your best to let the feeling of the music be reflected on the paper and the feeling of the articulations. If there's a huge legato passage for a violin, you have 3 options. You can write legato and let the violinist figure out the bowings. You can use large, long phrase markings or dotted phrase markings, but I wouldn't touch that if you don't know what you're doing, to indicate where the line should breathe. Or you can write good bowings. Writing good bowings is very, very difficult, and unless you're an actual orchestrator, you can probably forget about this one. It's not that big of a deal. So the thing to keep in mind is that phrase markings mean different things to different instruments. So in the case of a string player, they'll bow every C and then play all the other notes under one bow stroke. So there's 4 bow strokes here. For a woodwind player or a brass player, these are tonguing indications. They'll attack the Cs and then play the rest of the notes under the phrase markings without tonguing, so smoothly into each other. What you wouldn't want to give a player is this, basically. It's completely unclear. Yeah, it could mean, I suppose, for a string player, bow up and down on every note. It could mean for a brass player, tongue every note, but you'll probably still get a question about it. So be as clear as you can. Use articulations in combination with phrase markings, and try to communicate as clearly as possible what you want with your passages. Those are the 7 main things that DAWs suck at when translating your MIDI to notation. Good luck, and don't be a chump. I'm assuming it's your session, whether it's a studio or it's in your bedroom. At any rate, you'll be the one paying for it, or asking your buddy to spare his valuable time in coming and recording. Every wasted second figuring out lousy sheet music or asking questions might or might not cost money, but it'll definitely cost time. And everybody's time needs to be respected, including your own. Speaking of that, thanks for taking the time to watch this far, and very cool you're working with live musicians. Good luck.